Hello and welcome to Module 5, Child Health and Safety. Here are our objectives for this module: to provide participants with knowledge on the licensing regulations that govern health practices, requirements, and record keeping, guidelines regarding nutrition and food preparation in early childhood settings, information on how to create learning environments that protect the health and safety of young children. So when we're talking about health and nutrition in terms of early childhood, what we're really talking about is not only the food that is served in centers, but also incorporating health and nutrition into our curriculum. So we know that teaching children about nutrition can help children develop lifetime healthy habits, eating habits, and centers should have written monthly menus that are posted and followed. We also know that meals that are served at centers should be appealing, healthy, and safe. Additionally, I want to just cover these two key words because they help inform some of the issues or problems that come across in terms of nutrition in the field of early care and education. So nutrition is the science of food and how the body uses the foods taken in, and nutrients are the chemical substances in food that help build and maintain the body. So there are some issues in regards to nutrition that we need to be aware of, and then we also need to understand the different nutrients that our bodies need, because we should be making sure that children are getting exposure to those when we are planning meals in our program. So some nutritional problems are undernutrition, which is basically when children are not getting enough food, and then malnutrition, which is different than undernutrition, because malnutrition is when children are getting food but not the right types of food. So I always think of the difference between undernutrition and malnutrition. So undernutrition is basically when you're starving, so you may not have access to enough food. Malnutrition may mean that you are getting food, but maybe it's those kids who are coming into our centers who are having a bag of chips and a soda for breakfast. Additionally, we should be aware of obesity because obviously that is starting to affect young children more prevalently, and then that leads into health problems into adulthood. There are 6 types of nutrients, so those are the chemical substances that the body needs. And they are protein, carbs, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. So when we are planning, some things that we need to make sure that we're doing is making sure that the food is going to appeal to the children, because if it does, children are going to eat more of it. So this could mean making sure that you're providing a variety of food, that there's a lot of texture, that there's flavor, there's color, and that the temperatures are right. We should also be mindful of food preferences, and we should accommodate food preferences for young children unless they are unhealthy, because food preferences are often influenced by home life. We should also be providing multicultural experiences. They should be exposed to healthy foods from various cultures, and they should also be exposed to food from their own culture, because that actually promotes cultural identity and self-esteem. So what are some things that you can do for creating a nutritionally purposeful classroom? You can engage children in sensory exploration. You can provide multiple exposures to new foods, because we know that it takes, I think the statistic is between 3 and 5 times before somebody says they actually like it. And I think sometimes it's a matter of changing our language from "you don't like that" to "oh, you just don't like that yet." Invite the children to serve themselves at snack and meal times. Meal times are actually a great time to use intentional language when talking about food, and you can bring in lots of different vocabulary. I've seen some really excellent interactions between teachers and children during mealtime, because they are talking about things like texture. Is it crunchy? Is it crisp? You can talk about the food colors. You can relate it back to their home life. There's so much that you can do there. Make sure that you're only providing healthy food options, and then make sure you're also involving and informing families. I've had teachers who would hand out, not newsletters, but flyers or information about different types of nutrients. Why is it that your child needs protein? So make sure that you're involving families in that conversation. So I just want to touch briefly on what the Child and Adult Food Care Program is, that's CACFP. So there's a majority of you that your program may be using CACFP, and there's certain requirements that go along with that, because essentially when you follow the requirements, you are reimbursed for nutritious meals and snacks. But I should note that not every program does follow CACFP, but even if you're not following CACFP, you probably are following the USDA Food and Nutrition Service guidelines. So this is in terms of CACFP. I just want to be clear about that. but they do have set standards for meal and snack patterns. So children in care for 8 or fewer hours should be offered at least 1 meal and 2 snacks, or 2 meals and 1 snack. Children in care more than 8 hours should be offered at least 2 meals and 2 snacks, or 3 snacks and 1 meal. Food should not be offered at least 2 hours apart, but not more than 3 hours apart, except if sleeping, and children should not be rushed during meal times. Caregivers should also discuss the frequency of eating for breastfed infants. Another really good resource that you can use in terms of healthy eating is MyPlate, and this is under the USDA. If some of you remember, I know when I was younger it was the food pyramid, now it's changed to MyPlate. The thing about this website is that there's lots of information on there. There's games, activities that you can do, so I think that it's a useful resource for teachers to have, and the website is listed there on the bottom. So, on top of CACFP and USDA, there's also licensing. So in the state of Colorado, licensing does put some requirements on how often and how much food must be provided, and they have requirements around breakfast, snacks, and lunch. They also have requirements around family-style dining and the use of gloves. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. So there should be breakfast, and the purpose of breakfast is to break up the 10 to 14 hour overnight fast. Here are what CACFP recommends. I'm not going to read it. I think that breakfast is important because it provides energy for the morning and then throughout the day. Snacks. So most children are only able to eat small amounts of food in one sitting, so they should have snacks in between because they may not be properly nourished by eating just 3 meals a day. So there should be a mid-morning and a mid-afternoon snack. Lunch. Here are the CACFP recommendations. I'm not going to read those. You can take a few seconds and glance over it. And then family-style dining. So family-style dining is essentially when caregivers and teachers sit at the table during mealtime and partake in eating with young children. And in doing so, they are also utilizing family-style meal service where children are serving themselves when they're capable and there's enough for them to be able to do so. So this, we've already talked about, is a great time to be very intentional about your interactions and to talk about things that have gone on during the week or during the day, to talk about the food that's being served. Essentially, family-style dining should mimic what's going on in a home when families are sitting together eating together. It also should be noted that food should never be used as a punishment or a reward, and children should not be forced to eat, because this can really lead to negative side effects such as obesity, poor eating behavior, lasting food dislikes, and unhealthy eating behaviors. And I do think that it's important that children are encouraged but not forced to help themselves to all elements of the meal. We're going to switch gears a little bit because a part of child health and safety is actually keeping children safe from safe in our environment, but safe when they're outside of our environment, and healthy in terms of food and nutrition, but also healthy in terms of mental health. So we are going to talk a little bit about child abuse and neglect. I think the biggest thing to note is that in the state of Colorado, you are required to go through mandated reporter training every year, so this should not be a surprise to most of you. But 90% of abusers are actually family members, so it's people that you know. Sometimes they can be a distant family member, but generally they are people that are known to the child. And when we're talking about abuse, we are actually talking about non-accidental physical injury, neglect, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. And we're going to go over all of those in more detail. So, why is this important? The number of referral rates for child abuse and neglect actually continues to increase, with studies showing that younger children are more likely to be abused. We also know that abuse can happen in any family type or socioeconomic status, but there are some risk factors that are associated with it. Abused children often become troubled adults who may drop out of school, be unemployed, and commit violent crimes. They also have a high risk of being an abuser themselves. So there are some pretty serious consequences in terms of neglect and abuse. There's various impacts on systems, including medical systems, mental health systems, law enforcement, judicial, public service, and nonprofit agencies, but there's also an impact on the child and the families, including mental illness, substance abuse, developmental disabilities and learning problems, social problems with other children and adults, teen pregnancy, lack of success in school, and domestic violence. So all around, it's important that these effects are negated, and that children somebody is intervening and children are getting the support that they need if they're in situations that result in neglect and abuse. So non-accidental physical injury is physical abuse that is inflicted on purpose. So this can look like bruises, bites, burns, and other injuries. Children often refuse to discuss what happened to them. They may have an unusual fear of adults. They may have been threatened with further harm if they tell someone. Neglect actually can take on many forms. It's important to note that neglect may not necessarily be intentional. So an example of unintentional neglect might be a homeless family. So even though they may be trying to give their child proper food, medical and dental care and shelter and clothing, they may just not be able to for various reasons. So you should be alert to signs of neglect. If a child often arrives early or picked up late, they're in inappropriate or unclean clothing, they have poor hygiene or medical problems, or they're always hungry and fatigued. It's also important that you need to be attuned to different child rearing practices as well as cultural expectations and priorities, because they may not align with yours, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's neglect. Emotional abuse is the hardest one to pinpoint, because it's really a lot of not verbal, but not necessarily with the physical piece of it. So it's really the abuse of a child's self-concept through words or actions. It looks like insufficient love, guidance, and or support from parents, and children will start to lose self-esteem. So here are some things that you can look for. Just take a few seconds and read over the slide. Stop it if you need to, but basically you're going to see children withdraw. So sexual abuse is forcing a child to observe or engage in sexual activities with an adult. There's two types. The first one is incest, so that's sexual abuse that is inflicted by a relative, and then molestation, which is sexual contact made by someone outside the family with a child. There may be physical signs and pain complaints. Sexually abused children commonly have poor peer behavior, and they may have age-inappropriate knowledge of sex. And this can affect, they can express affection in improper ways as well, or become disruptive or aggressive. So as I stated before, in the state of Colorado, anybody in these positions, so healthcare workers, social workers, school administrators, teachers, you're all mandated reporters of child abuse, meaning you're required by law to report any known or suspected cases of child abuse. You really need to read your state statute to learn your legal responsibilities and how to comply with laws. If anybody is not familiar with them, there is a training that you can take through the state of Colorado listed on this slide. So yeah, if you need more information or you feel like you are not getting all of the information that you need when going through training, you are welcome to use this as a resource. So I think that it's important that we understand that there are resources out there that can help your families. Some families, like Mile High, we have family and community advocates that are meant to be as a resource for parents, but not every organization has stuff like that. But I do think that there are things that you can do if you know that families are struggling. So there's parenting classes, self-help or support groups, financial planning, family counseling, helplines, preventative health care programs for children, and talking about nutrition so that you can promote healthy living. It's also important to note that in terms of child abuse and neglect, that you are respecting privacy laws and understanding that a child's records cannot be given to anyone other than a parent without the parent's permission, and that parents have unlimited access to all of their child's records that are kept at the center. All right, this week you finally are getting around to competency statement 1. You're going to write an I will statement focused on how you will work to establish and maintain a health, safety, learning environment. Make sure you talk about how you are going to follow licensing rules and regulations, and you will participate in mandated reporting. And you will be completing another resource collection item, so you're going to collect information on where to report child abuse and neglect. It's going to be different in other states, but in Colorado, it's the Colorado Department of Human Services, and then you have a Check Your Knowledge quiz. All right, I will talk to you guys later this week.